by emphasizing suffering, you are in effect sweeping the real issue under the table. And the real issue is political right. Refugees are not about neediness. Refugees are about protection and the right to protection. That's a human right, which is unconditional.
Learning about refugees is very much more than learning just about forced migration and refugees. Learning about refugees is learning about social closure, namely those processes that create the boundaries between in-group and out-group, between us and them, between citizen and alien, between good migrants and bad migrants, between those who deserve rights and protection and those who do not deserve rights and protection, between ultimately those who are human and those who are perhaps not so human. As Hannah Arendt, in a famous statement on refugees, pointed out, the condition that many refugees find themselves in is, as she called it, a condition of absolute lawlessness. And in this condition of absolute lawlessness, it is not just that refugees do not have rights, it's that they don't have the right to have rights.
Then you see, of course, a lot of geographic factors, climate factors, and all the rest of it that produce this lawlessness. Okay, but now that the lawlessness is there, I want you to understand that this lawlessness produces a kind of spiral of decline. I've listed 3 dimensions of it here. And these dimensions kind of reinforce each other. That's what I tried to connect with the red arrows. The idea that you can't, in order to move on the question of refugees or economy or anything else, you need to get rid of the warlord, tyrannical political systems. In order to do that, you have to uproot the patrimonialism, the fact that everything works on nepotism and corruption, and I'll scratch my back, you scratch yours, and if you're not one of the ones scratching my back, I will exterminate you and push your whole village into exile, right? The fact that these patron-client systems function is a reason that the warlordism is possible. That is the method, the tool. Patrimonialism is the tool by which these warlords you read about on rebel and government sides alike. Please let's not make that a meaningful distinction. They're all operating on the same principle of maintaining tyrannical warlord control through patrimonialism. But in order to uproot the patrimonialism, you have to get rid of the kind of root cause of poverty and resourcelessness and desperation and unemployment, which is in turn driving the patrimonialism.
The tensions of globalization are nowhere more salient and nowhere more interesting to look at than in the field of refugee dynamics and forced migration. One of the most spectacular achievements of globalization is a transnational migrant smuggling industry. On the one hand, the nation state is here to stay. Nationalism is a dominant political ideology in the world and will continue to be. And state sovereignty is not going anywhere. At the same time, when it comes to forced migrants, when it comes to refugees, people of flesh and blood, the dominant posture has been restrictionism. So with the general understanding that free movement of stuff, free movement of goods, free movement of services, of ideas, of information through the internet and so on is a good thing, there is a parallel understanding that the free movement of forced migrants, of human beings fleeing persecution, violence, ecological catastrophe, is not only a bad thing, but is something to be preempted, something to be securitized, something to be restricted. The UNHCR reports to us that we have some 70 million, over 70 million people of interest, as they call them, namely forced migrants of various kinds. 80% of refugees globally are in countries that are neighboring the countries that they fled. That is to say, when we talk about refugees, most of whom are women and children, we are not speaking about people who go to Western Europe, the United States, Canada, Australia, and the other fancy countries. We sometimes forget that refugee crises, refugee waves, to use that terrible metaphor, refugee problems are not primarily problems of the developed advanced democracies. They are primarily problems of neighboring countries, given the curse of geography, of the neighboring countries, the major host countries around source countries where the refugees come from. 3 countries in the world account for more than half of all refugees registered by the UNHCR: Syria, Afghanistan, and South Sudan, which illustrates again the tremendous asymmetry between where refugees come from and where they go on the one side, and the advanced democracies, what's sometimes called the global north, on the other.
If the guy leaves after months of deliberation to go to Kuwait to work as an economic migrant, a Palestinian, say, very different from leaving when your house is being shelled. When your house is being shelled, it's not that they're leaving because they found enough money to finally leave. It's not that they finally got the cousin from Germany to send them a couple of more euros. It is because the time was dictated by socio-political factors.
Climate change has already begun to displace hundreds of thousands of people around the world, and it will continue to generate what are called eco-refugees at an even more intense, even more amplified level in the coming decades. Traditionally, refugees have been fleeing persecution, fleeing ethnic conflict, fleeing collective violence, fleeing war. And indeed, much of the course is going to teach us about the dynamics of collective violence and their consequences, especially their often invisible consequences. However, the fact that this has been the primary driver, the primary push factor, as it's called, of forced migration over most of history, doesn't mean that that will continue to be so. And indeed, if we don't need to accept the alarmist, what are called the alarmist predictions of climate science, to know that that in the coming decades, extreme weather events and other consequences of anthropogenic global warming are going to produce tens of millions, possibly hundreds of millions of eco-migrants, eco-refugees, people fleeing climate disaster. And so learning about refugee dynamics is very much a window into the future of what we can expect given the ecological conditions that are going to happen in this century. And learning about refugees in the 20th century, in the early 21st century, learning about refugee dynamics, about forced migration, is a fantastic opportunity to understand what we can expect from eco-migrants in the future.